The story begins on a cold, rainy morning in the heart of New York City. The streets were slick with rain, and the air carried a chill that seemed to seep into people's bones. Inside an old auction house, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, the atmosphere was buzzing with excitement. People from all walks of life had gathered for the day's event, eager to bid on rare antiques, forgotten heirlooms, and peculiar artifacts. Among them stood Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, a wealthy, elderly black woman who drew attention the moment she walked through the doors. Eleanor was dressed elegantly, wearing a velvet coat that shimmered faintly under the dim lights of the auction hall. On her head sat a wide-brimmed hat adorned with a single red feather, which bobbed gently as she moved. Her presence commanded respect. Her posture was straight, her steps deliberate, and her eyes sharp yet warm. But despite her dignified appearance, Eleanor knew she didn't quite fit in with the crowd. Most of the attendees were white, clad in expensive suits or designer dresses, whispering amongst themselves about the treasures they hoped to take home. As Eleanor made her way through the room, she could feel their stares burning into her back. Some glanced at her curiously while others exchanged knowing looks, their lips curling into smirks. A few even laughed softly behind their hands, making snide comments loud enough for her to overhear. "Who does she think she is?" One man muttered to his companion. "Look at that hat. Does she really think this is a fashion show?" Another sneered. Their words stung, but Eleanor didn't let it show. She simply held her head high, focusing on why she had come here today. This wasn't just any ordinary auction for Eleanor. It was personal. For years, she had dreamed of finding something that had been lost to her family for generations. Set of intricately carved wooden figurines known as the Stowe Collection. These pieces weren't just beautiful works of art. They were symbols of resilience, history, and identity. They had been crafted by enslaved artisans during the 19th century, each figure telling a story of struggle and survival. Passed down through families, the collection had eventually disappeared after being sold off at an estate sale decades ago. Eleanor's grandmother, a former sharecropper turned seamstress, used to tell her stories about the figurines when she was a child. Those tales stayed with Eleanor throughout her life, fueling her determination to bring the collection back to its rightful place. Growing up in rural Georgia, Eleanor had always felt a deep connection to her roots. Her grandmother often spoke of how the figurines represented hope and strength, reminding them of where they came from and what they had overcome. As a young girl, Eleanor would sit by the fireplace, listening intently as her grandmother described every detail: the smooth curves of the wood, the delicate carvings, the way the light danced across their surfaces. Even though she had never seen the figurines herself, Eleanor imagined them as guardians of her family's legacy, watching over them through the years. Now, as she sat in the crowded auction hall, Eleanor couldn't help but feel a mix of nerves and excitement. She had spent months researching, tracking down leads, and saving money to make this moment possible. This was her chance to reclaim a piece of her family's history, to honor the sacrifices of those who came before her. Yet, she couldn't ignore the whispers swirling around her. The mocking laughter and judgmental glances weighed heavily on her shoulders, but she refused to let them break her spirit. Instead, Eleanor focused on the items displayed in front of her. Each lot was presented with great fanfare, accompanied by detailed descriptions from the auctioneer. Some bidders raised their paddles eagerly, competing fiercely for paintings, vases, and other collectibles. Eleanor watched silently, waiting for her moment. When the gavel finally struck for the Stowe Collection, the room seemed to hold its breath. Bidders leaned forward in their seats, their eyes fixed on the stage. Eleanor tightened her grip on her paddle, feeling her heartbeat quicken. The bidding started low, but it didn't take long for the price to climb. One bidder after another joined in, driving the cost higher and higher. Eleanor remained patient, observing carefully as the numbers soared past $30,000, then $40,000. Around her, the whispers grew louder. "What's she doing here?" someone asked mockingly. "She can't possibly afford this," another chimed in. Eleanor ignored them, her focus unwavering. She had prepared for this moment, and nothing, not their jeers, not their condescending remarks, would stop her. When the bidding reached $50,000, many dropped out, shaking their heads in disbelief at how much the figurines were worth. But Eleanor stayed calm, calculating every move like a seasoned strategist. She waited for the right time to strike, knowing that patience was key. As the price climbed to $75,000, the room began to thin out, leaving only a handful of serious contenders. Still, Eleanor held her ground, determined to see this through no matter what. By now, some of the attendees had started to notice her persistence. A few glanced at her with curiosity, wondering who this mysterious woman was and why she was so intent on winning. Others continued to mock her openly, rolling their eyes or whispering cruel jokes. But Eleanor didn't care. She reminded herself of her grandmother's words. Sometimes you've got to fight for what's yours no matter how hard the battle gets. Those words echoed in her mind, giving her the strength to keep going. As the bidding entered its final stages, the tension in the room became palpable. The auctioneer's voice rang out clearly, calling for higher bids with each passing second. Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. She knew the hardest part was yet to come, but she was ready. Whatever happened next, she vowed to stay true to herself and to her mission. After all, this wasn't just about buying a set of figurines. It was about reclaiming her family's story, preserving their legacy, and proving that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. As the auction continued, the tension in the room grew thicker with each passing moment. The bidding for the Stowe collection had reached $75,000, and only a few determined individuals remained in the race. Eleanor sat quietly, her hands folded neatly on her lap, but her mind was racing. She could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her, both the stares of those who doubted her and the excitement of those who were genuinely curious about how far she would go. Despite the pressure, she maintained her composure, her eyes fixed firmly on the auctioneer. Among the remaining bidders was a man named Mr. Harrison, a well-known collector notorious for his obsession with acquiring rare artifacts. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, and carried an air of arrogance that made others wary of crossing him. Harrison had attended countless auctions over the years, always walking away victorious thanks to his vast wealth and ruthless determination. Today, he seemed particularly interested in the Stowe collection, though not because of its historical significance or cultural value. To him, it was just another trophy, a piece to add to his ever-growing collection of expensive curiosities. Harrison glanced at Eleanor occasionally, his lips curling into a faint smirk whenever their eyes met. He couldn't understand why someone like her, a black woman, clearly older than most in the room, would dare to compete against him. In his mind, this wasn't her world. It belonged to people like him, wealthy, influential, and unbothered by trivial things like emotion or heritage. She'll drop out soon enough, he thought dismissively, leaning back in his chair as if victory were already his. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She had faced challenges far greater than this throughout her life, and she wasn't about to let a man like Harrison intimidate her. Every time he raised his paddle, she matched him without hesitation. Her calm demeanor masked the storm brewing inside her, a mix of anger, pride, and determination. She reminded herself that this wasn't just about winning. It was about proving something, not to them but to herself. This was her family's legacy, and no amount of mockery or disdain could take that away from her. The price climbed steadily, reaching $100,000. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the number echoed off the walls of the auction hall. Some attendees leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the unfolding drama, while others whispered among themselves, speculating about who would emerge victorious. "Do you think she can actually afford this?" one woman asked her friend. Raising an eyebrow skeptically, her companion shrugged, equally unsure. Meanwhile, a young man sitting nearby watched Eleanor intently, impressed by her resolve. Unlike the others, he didn't underestimate her. There was something about the way she carried herself, her quiet confidence that suggested she wasn't bluffing. Eleanor ignored the chatter around her, focusing instead on the rhythm of the auctioneer's voice. Each call for a higher bid felt like a heartbeat, steady and relentless. When Harrison pushed the price to $120,000, the room fell silent. Even the auctioneer paused briefly, glancing between the two remaining contenders. For a moment, it seemed as though Eleanor might hesitate, but then with a subtle nod she raised her paddle once more. The sharp click of wood against wood signaled her bid, and the room erupted into murmurs of surprise. Harrison frowned, visibly irritated. He hadn't expected this level of resistance. Normally, his competitors backed down long before things got this intense. Yet here was Eleanor refusing to give up, matching him dollar for dollar. His frustration boiled over, and he leaned toward his assistant, muttering under his breath, "Who is this woman? What does she even want with these old carvings?" Eleanor heard fragments of his comment but chose not to react. Instead, she thought about her grandmother, the woman who had inspired this journey. She remembered sitting on the porch of their small Georgia home, listening to stories about the figurines and the hands that had carved them. Her grandmother's voice had been filled with admiration and reverence, describing how each figure represented strength, resilience, and hope. "These aren't just objects," she used to say. "They're pieces of our soul. They remind us of where we came from and what we've overcome." Those words gave Eleanor strength now, as the bidding surpassed $150,000. The other bidders had long since dropped out, leaving only her and Harrison. The room felt smaller somehow, the air heavier with anticipation. People shifted uncomfortably, in their seats unsure whether to cheer or remain silent. Even the auctioneer seemed caught off guard by the intensity of the competition. "Going once, going twice," he called out, his voice rising slightly as he waited for the next move. Harrison hesitated, his brow furrowed in thought. He glanced at Eleanor again, trying to gauge whether she was bluffing. Surely someone like her couldn't afford to keep going much longer. But there was no hint of uncertainty in her expression. Her gaze was steady, unwavering, as if she had already decided that failure wasn't an option. With a deep sigh, Harrison raised his paddle once more, pushing the price to $160,000. The crowd gasped audibly, some shaking their heads in disbelief at how high the stakes had become. Eleanor took a slow, deliberate breath before responding. She knew she was nearing her limit, both financially and emotionally, but she also knew that giving up now would mean letting go of everything she had worked so hard to achieve. So with a firm hand, she raised her paddle again, signaling her bid. The room buzzed with excitement as the price climbed to $170,000. Harrison clenched his jaw, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. For the first time he looked uncertain, unsure whether he wanted to continue. Meanwhile, Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest, but her exterior remained calm. She thought about all the sacrifices her ancestors had made, the struggles they endured so that future generations could live with dignity and purpose. If they could persevere through unimaginable hardships, surely she could endure this final challenge. Closing her eyes briefly, she whispered a silent prayer, asking for courage and guidance. The auctioneer's voice broke through her thoughts. $180,000? Do I hear $190,000? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Harrison stared at his paddle, his fingers trembling slightly. After what felt like an eternity, he shook his head and set it down on the table. Defeat etched itself onto his face as he slumped back in his chair. Defeated. A collective gasp swept through the room as the reality sank in. Eleanor had won. The auctioneer's gavel came crashing down, sealing the deal. "Sold. To the lady in the red feather," he announced, his voice booming across the hall. Cheers erupted from unexpected corners, breaking the stunned silence. Some clapped politely, while others exchanged astonished glances. Even those who had mocked her earlier couldn't help but admire her tenacity. Eleanor sat still for a moment, letting the enormity of what she had accomplished wash over her. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of triumph. She had done it. Against all odds, She had reclaimed her family's heritage. As the crowd began to disperse, several people approached her cautiously, offering congratulations tinged with curiosity. One woman even apologized for her earlier behavior, though Eleanor accepted the apology graciously, choosing not to dwell on the negativity. Instead, she focused on the joy bubbling within her. She thought about her grandmother, imagining the look of pride that would have lit up her face if she were here today. This victory wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had fought, sacrificed, and dreamed alongside her. And as she stood to leave the auction house, clutching the paperwork confirming her purchase, Eleanor knew that this was only the beginning. The real work, honoring her family's legacy and sharing their story with the world, was yet to come. But for now, she allowed herself to bask in the glow of her hard-fought success. The victory at the auction house was only the beginning of a new chapter in Eleanor's life. As she left the crowded hall, clutching the paperwork that confirmed her ownership of the Stowe collection, she felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the streets glistening under the soft glow of streetlights. Eleanor paused for a moment, taking a deep breath of the cool night air. It smelled fresh, almost cleansing, as if the world itself was celebrating her triumph. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to smile, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. But the journey wasn't over yet. Winning the figurines was one thing. Bringing them back into her family's fold and honoring their legacy was another. Eleanor knew this would require more than just money or determination. It would take effort, patience, and a willingness to share her story with others. She climbed into her car, carefully placing the documents on the passenger seat beside her. As she drove home, her mind wandered to what lay ahead. How would she preserve these pieces? Where should they be displayed? And most importantly, how could she ensure that their significance wasn't lost on future generations? When Eleanor arrived at her spacious apartment, she wasted no time unpacking the figurines. They had been carefully wrapped in protective layers of tissue paper and placed inside a sturdy wooden crate. With trembling hands, she opened the box, revealing the treasures within. One by one, she lifted each figurine, examining it closely under the warm light of her living room lamp. The craftsmanship was breathtaking. Every curve, every detail told a story. Some figures depicted scenes of daily life: a woman weaving cloth, a man tending to crops, children playing near a stream. Others symbolized resilience and hope: a bird, spreading its wings, a tree with roots stretching deep into the earth. Eleanor ran her fingers gently over the smooth surfaces, feeling a connection to the artisans who had created them centuries ago. These weren't just objects. They were fragments of history, reminders of the strength and creativity of those who had come before her. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind once more, recounting tales of how these figurines had once stood proudly in their family home, passed down from generation to generation until they were lost. Now, after decades of separation, they were finally back where they belonged. Over the next few days, Eleanor dedicated herself to learning everything she could about the collection. She scoured libraries, visited museums, and consulted historians to uncover its origins. Each discovery filled her with pride and renewed purpose. She learned that the figurines had been crafted by enslaved artisans during the 19th century, using whatever materials they could find. Despite the harsh conditions, they endured. They poured their hearts into their work, creating pieces that celebrated their humanity and culture. This knowledge deepened Eleanor's appreciation for the collection and strengthened her resolve to honor their legacy. As word of her victory spread, curiosity about the Stowe collection grew. Local newspapers picked up the story, running features on Eleanor and her quest to reclaim her family's heritage. Headlines like "A Legacy Reclaimed" and "The Woman Who Defied Odds" caught people's attention, sparking conversations across the city. Many admired Eleanor's determination and courage, while others expressed interest in the historical significance of the figurines. Museums reached out, eager to display the collection, but Eleanor politely declined. She believed the figurines belonged in her home, surrounded by love and memories, rather than behind glass cases in a sterile exhibit. Instead, Eleanor decided to open her doors to the community. She invited neighbors, friends, and even strangers to visit her apartment and see the figurines for themselves. On weekends, she hosted small gatherings where she shared the stories behind each piece, explaining their cultural and historical importance. People listened intently, captivated not only by the beauty of the figurines but also by Eleanor's passion and dedication. Some brought their children along, hoping to instill in them a sense of pride and understanding of their shared history. One Saturday afternoon, a young girl named Maya attended one of these gatherings with her mother. Wide-eyed and curious, she wandered around Eleanor's living room, marveling at the intricate details of the figurines. When Eleanor noticed her fascination, she knelt down to explain the meaning behind one particular figure, a bird perched on a branch, its wings slightly raised as if preparing to take flight. "This bird represents freedom," Eleanor said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "It reminds us that no matter how difficult things may seem, we always have the power to rise above." Maya nodded thoughtfully, her eyes shining with wonder. Her mother thanked Eleanor profusely, saying, "You're doing something truly special here. Not many people would go to such lengths to preserve their history, and then share it so openly with others." Eleanor smiled warmly, touched by the compliment. She realized that her efforts weren't just about reclaiming her family's past. They were about building bridges and fostering a deeper understanding of the struggles and triumphs that shaped their collective identity. Despite the positive response, not everyone supported Eleanor's decision to keep the figurines private. Critics argued that such valuable artifacts should be accessible to a wider audience, housed in institutions where experts could study and preserve them. Others accused her of being selfish, claiming she was depriving the public of an opportunity to learn from the collection. Eleanor listened to their arguments calmly, acknowledging their concerns without wavering in her stance. "These figurines are more than relics," she explained during an interview with a local journalist. "They're part of my family's soul. They carry the hopes, dreams, and resilience of my ancestors. I owe it to them to protect and honor their legacy in my own way." Her words resonated with many, silencing some of the criticism. Those who continued to question her motives often misunderstood her intentions. To Eleanor, preserving the collection wasn't about exclusivity. It was about intimacy. By keeping the figurines close, she ensured they remained rooted in the context of family and community, rather than becoming mere commodities to be admired from afar. In addition to hosting gatherings, Eleanor began documenting the stories associated with the figurines. She wrote letters to her grandchildren detailing the history of each piece and encouraging them to pass the knowledge on to their own children someday. She also started a journal, jotting down reflections and memories inspired by the collection. Writing helped her process the emotions stirred by her journey: the joy of victory, the sting of mockery, and the profound sense of fulfillment that came from reconnecting with her roots. One evening, as Eleanor sat at her desk penning an entry in her journal, she paused to look at the figurines arranged neatly on a shelf nearby. The red feather in her hat caught the light, casting a soft shadow across the room. She thought about all she had overcome to bring them home. The doubters, the naysayers, the moments of doubt that had threatened to derail her. Yet through it all, she had persevered, driven by a love for her family and a desire to preserve their legacy. Eleanor closed her journal and stood up, walking over to the shelf. She picked up one of the figurines, a woman cradling a child in her arms, and held it close to her heart. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude this time. She whispered a quiet, "Thank you," to her ancestors, promising to honor their memory in every way she could. Looking around her living room, now transformed into a sanctuary of history and culture, Eleanor felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she was ready. She had reclaimed more than just a set of figurines. She had reclaimed her identity, her pride, and her place in the world. And as long as she lived, she vowed to keep their stories alive, ensuring that future generations would never forget where they came from. The months following Eleanor's victory at the auction house were transformative, not just for her, but for the community that had begun to gather around her. Word of the Stowe collection and its remarkable journey spread far beyond the confines of Eleanor's apartment. Local newspapers continued to cover her story, highlighting not only her determination to reclaim her family's heritage, but also her efforts to share it with others. The media attention brought unexpected visitors to her doorstep: historians, educators, artists, and even filmmakers eager to learn more about the figurines and their significance. At first, Eleanor was hesitant to open her home to strangers, fearing that her private sanctuary might become a spectacle. But as she met these individuals and listened to their stories, she realized they shared a common thread: a desire to connect with history in a meaningful way. Many expressed gratitude for the opportunity to see the figurines up close, noting how rare it was to encounter artifacts that carried such personal and cultural weight. Others confessed that Eleanor's journey had inspired them to explore their own roots, sparking a renewed interest in family histories long forgotten. One visitor who stood out was Dr. Amelia Carter, a historian specializing in African American art and culture. She arrived one rainy afternoon, carrying a leather-bound notebook and a camera slung over her shoulder. Her demeanor was warm, yet professional, and she wasted no time introducing herself. "Mrs. Thompson," she began, extending her hand. "I've been following your story for months now, and I must say it's extraordinary. These figurines are not just beautiful, they're a testament to the resilience and creativity of our ancestors." Eleanor welcomed Dr. Carter into her living room, where the figurines were displayed prominently on wooden shelves. As the two women sat together, Eleanor recounted the details of her journey: the years spent researching, the sacrifices made to afford the auction, and the emotional toll of facing ridicule from those who doubted her. Dr. Carter listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes or snapping photographs of the collection. When Eleanor finished speaking, Dr. Carter leaned back in her chair, visibly moved. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "what you've done here is monumental. It's not just about reclaiming lost artifacts, it's about rewriting history. For so long, stories like yours have been erased or ignored. But by bringing these figurines back into your family and sharing them with others, you're ensuring that those stories are told and heard." Her words struck a chord with Eleanor. Until now, she had viewed her actions primarily as a personal mission, a way to honor her grandmother and preserve her family's legacy. But hearing Dr. Carter frame it in broader terms, as part of a larger effort to reclaim and celebrate Black history, gave her a new perspective. Perhaps her work extended beyond her immediate circle. Perhaps it could inspire others to seek out and preserve their own heritage. Encouraged by this realization, Eleanor decided to expand her outreach efforts. She partnered with Dr. Carter to organize a series of educational workshops aimed at schools and community centers. Together, they developed interactive presentations that combined storytelling, visual aids, and hands-on activities to engage participants of all ages. During these sessions, Eleanor spoke passionately about the figurines, explaining their historical context and encouraging listeners to reflect on their own connections to the past. One workshop took place at a local elementary school, where a group of wide-eyed children gathered around Eleanor as she held up a figurine depicting a farmer tending to his crops. "This man worked hard every day to provide for his family," she explained, her voice gentle yet firm. "Even though he didn't own the land he worked on, he still found ways to create beauty and meaning in his life. That's what these figurines represent: hope, strength, and resilience." The children listened attentively, their faces lighting up with curiosity. Afterward, several approached Eleanor to ask questions or share their thoughts. One boy shyly admitted that his grandfather used to tell him similar stories about working on a farm. Another girl proudly announced that she wanted to be an artist when she grew up, inspired by the intricate carvings on the figurines. Moments like these reminded Eleanor why she had chosen to keep the collection close. It allowed her to foster genuine connections, creating a ripple effect of inspiration and understanding. As the workshops gained popularity, Eleanor received invitations to speak at conferences and cultural events across the country. At first, she declined most of them, preferring to stay rooted in her community. But eventually, she agreed to participate in a panel discussion hosted by a prominent museum in Washington, D.C. The event focused on the importance of preserving Black history and featured speakers from various fields, including academia, activism, and the arts. Standing on stage alongside accomplished professionals, Eleanor felt a mix of nerves and pride. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, especially in such a formal setting, but as she began to speak, her anxiety melted away. She talked about her grandmother's stories, the challenges she faced during the auction, and the joy of bringing the figurines home. Her honesty and passion resonated with the audience, earning her a standing ovation at the end of the session. Afterward, people lined up to thank her, many sharing their own experiences of reconnecting with their heritage. One woman, tears streaming down her face, hugged Eleanor tightly and whispered, "You've given me hope. I always thought my family's history was lost forever, but now I know it's possible to find it again." Such encounters reinforced Eleanor's belief that her journey was bigger than herself. It was about empowering others to reclaim their stories and identities. Despite her growing recognition, Eleanor remained grounded. She continued hosting gatherings in her apartment, welcoming anyone who wished to see the figurines and hear their stories. Some visitors came seeking solace, finding comfort in the quiet strength exuded by the carvings. Others arrived with questions, eager to learn more about the artisans who created them or the techniques used in their construction. Regardless of their reasons, Eleanor treated each guest with kindness and respect, ensuring they left feeling enriched and inspired. However, not everyone approved of her approach. Critics argued that keeping the collection private limited its impact, suggesting that donating it to a museum would allow for greater accessibility and preservation. While Eleanor understood their concerns, she stood firm in her decision. To her, the figurines weren't relics to be studied or admired from afar. They were living symbols of her family's legacy, meant to be experienced within the intimacy of her home. In response to these criticisms, Eleanor wrote an op-ed for a national publication, articulating her philosophy. "History isn't just something we read about in books or see behind glass cases," she wrote. "It's alive in the stories we tell, the traditions we pass down, and the objects we cherish. By keeping the Stowe collection close, I'm ensuring that its spirit remains alive, not as a static artifact, but as a dynamic force that continues to shape our lives." The article sparked widespread debate, drawing both praise and criticism. Supporters applauded Eleanor's commitment to preserving the figurines' cultural significance, while detractors accused her of hoarding a valuable resource. Yet through it all, Eleanor maintained her composure, refusing to let negativity overshadow her mission. Back at home, surrounded by the figurines and the memories they evoked, Eleanor reflected on how far she had come. From the cold, judgmental stares at the auction house to the warmth and admiration of those who now gathered in her living room, her journey had been filled with challenges and triumphs, but above all, it had been a testament to the power of perseverance and love for her family, her community, and her heritage. As she prepared for another gathering, arranging chairs and setting out refreshments, Eleanor felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She knew there would always be obstacles to overcome, voices that sought to diminish her achievements, but she also knew that her work mattered, not just to her, but to everyone who believed in the importance of remembering where they came from. And as long as she drew breath, she vowed to keep telling the stories of the Stowe collection, ensuring that their legacy endured for generations to come. As the months turned into years, Eleanor's life became a tapestry woven with threads of purpose, connection, and legacy. Her decision to keep the Stowe collection in her home had transformed not only her own world, but also the lives of countless others who crossed her threshold. What began as a personal mission to reclaim her family's heritage had evolved into something far greater, a movement that celebrated resilience, culture, and the power of storytelling. Eleanor's gatherings grew in size and frequency, attracting visitors from all walks of life. Some came seeking knowledge, eager to learn about the history behind the figurines. Others arrived with heavy hearts, hoping to find solace in the stories of survival and strength that the carvings symbolized. Still, there were those who simply wanted to bask in the warmth of Eleanor's presence, drawn by her unwavering kindness and quiet wisdom. No matter their reasons, everyone left her apartment feeling changed in some small yet profound way. One of Eleanor's most cherished memories was of a young man named Marcus, who visited on a chilly autumn afternoon. He was tall and lanky, with a nervous energy that betrayed his unease. When Eleanor greeted him at the door, he hesitated before stepping inside, clutching a worn notebook to his chest. "I'm sorry for intruding," he stammered. I heard about what you're doing here, and I thought maybe you could help me." Intrigued, Eleanor invited him to sit down and offered him a cup of tea. As they talked, Marcus revealed that he had recently discovered a box of old letters and photographs belonging to his great-grandparents. The documents hinted at a painful past, stories of sharecropping, discrimination, and loss, but they also contained fragments of hope and resilience. Marcus struggled to make sense of it all. "I want to honor them," he said, his voice trembling, "but I don't even know where to start." Eleanor listened patiently, nodding as he spoke. She understood his dilemma. After all, she had once stood in his shoes, unsure how to piece together the scattered remnants of her family's history. Reaching for one of the figurines, a woman weaving cloth, she handed it to him. "This is how we begin," she said softly. "By holding on to the things that remind us of who we are. These objects carry our ancestors' voices. They tell us where we came from so we can figure out where we're going." Over the next few weeks, Marcus became a regular visitor. Together, he and Eleanor sifted through his family's documents, piecing together stories and filling in gaps. Slowly but surely, a narrative emerged, one of hardship and triumph, of love and perseverance. Inspired by Eleanor's example, Marcus decided to create an exhibition showcasing his findings. With her guidance, he curated a display that combined photographs, letters, and artwork inspired by his family's journey. The event drew crowds, sparking conversations about identity, memory, and the importance of preserving Black history. Stories like Marcus's reinforced Eleanor's belief in the transformative power of shared experiences. Yet, despite the joy she derived from helping others, she couldn't ignore the challenges that came with her role. Maintaining the collection required constant care and attention. Each figurine needed to be cleaned, polished, and protected from environmental damage. Additionally, the steady stream of visitors meant that Eleanor rarely had time to herself. While she cherished the opportunity to connect with people, there were days when exhaustion crept in, leaving her yearning for solitude. On one such day, Eleanor found herself sitting alone in her living room, gazing at the figurines arranged neatly on their shelves. The red feather in her hat caught the fading sunlight streaming through the window, casting a soft glow across the room. She thought about how much her life had changed since the auction house. Back then, she had been an outsider, mocked and underestimated by those who believed wealth and status defined worth. Now she was a beacon of inspiration, someone others looked to for guidance and encouragement. But with admiration came responsibility and scrutiny. Critics continued to question her decision to keep the figurines private, accusing her of selfishness or elitism. Some suggested that she lacked the expertise to properly preserve such valuable artifacts, while others argued that their cultural significance warranted public access. Though Eleanor remained steadfast in her convictions, the constant criticism weighed heavily on her at times. It was during moments like these that Eleanor turned to her journal, pouring her thoughts onto its pages. Writing helped her process her emotions, reminding her why she had chosen this path in the first place. One entry read, "They don't understand. It's not about hiding the figurines away. It's about keeping them alive. In a museum, they'd be frozen in time, admired but untouched. Here they breathe, they speak, they live." Her reflections were interrupted by a knock at the door. Opening it, she found Dr. Amelia Carter standing on the other side, holding a stack of papers and wearing an apologetic smile. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," Amelia said, stepping inside. "I've been meaning to show you something." The Two women settled into their usual spots in the living room, and Amelia spread the papers across the coffee table. They were sketches, designs for a traveling exhibit featuring replicas of the figurines. "I've been working on this idea for a while now," Amelia explained. "If we can't take the originals everywhere, why not bring pieces of them to the people? We could use 3D printing technology to create exact replicas, allowing communities across the country to experience the collection without compromising its integrity." Eleanor studied the sketches carefully, her heart swelling with excitement. This was exactly the kind of solution she had hoped for, a way to share the figurines' stories without sacrificing their connection to her family. "It's brilliant," she said finally, looking up at Amelia with a smile. "Let's do it." Thus began a new chapter in Eleanor's journey. Over the next several months, she and Amelia collaborated closely, overseeing every detail of the project. From selecting materials to designing educational materials, they worked tirelessly to ensure the exhibit would honor the figurines' legacy. Meanwhile, Eleanor continued hosting gatherings in her apartment, using the opportunity to gather feedback from visitors about what they hoped to see in the traveling display. When the exhibit finally launched, it exceeded all expectations. Dubbed Roots and Wings, the legacy of the Stowe collection, it debuted at a community center in Harlem, drawing crowds from near and far. Visitors marveled at the intricate replicas, each accompanied by detailed descriptions and multimedia presentations explaining their historical and cultural significance. Interactive stations allowed attendees to engage with the material in meaningful ways, whether by crafting their own carvings or recording their own family stories. One particularly moving moment occurred when a group of elderly women gathered around a replica of the bird figurine, the same one Eleanor had shown Maya years earlier. One of them, tears streaming down her face, recounted how her mother used to sing songs about freedom whenever life felt overwhelming. Another chimed in, sharing how her father taught her to carve wood as a way of staying connected to their ancestors. Their voices intertwined, forming a chorus of resilience and remembrance that echoed throughout the room. News of the exhibit's success spread quickly, leading to invitations for it to travel to cities nationwide. Each stop brought new audiences, new stories, and new connections. Schools incorporated visits into their curricula, while local organizations hosted panels and workshops inspired by the themes explored in the display. Even museums that had once criticized Eleanor's decision to keep the originals private praised the exhibit for its innovative approach to accessibility and education. Through it all, Eleanor remained deeply involved, traveling with the exhibit whenever possible and speaking at events alongside Amelia. Though the pace was grueling, she found immense fulfillment in watching the figurines' influence expand beyond her wildest dreams. Yet, no matter how far she traveled or how many people she met, she always returned home to her apartment, where the original collection awaited her. There, surrounded by the familiar carvings and the memories they evoked, Eleanor reflected on the impact of her work. She thought about Marcus, whose courage to confront his family's past had inspired others to do the same. She thought about Maya, whose wide-eyed curiosity reminded her of the importance of passing down stories to future generations. And she thought about her grandmother, whose tales had set her on this path in the first place. Though Eleanor knew her time was limited, she took comfort in knowing that her efforts had planted seeds that would continue to grow long after she was gone. The figurines weren't just symbols of her family's legacy. They were catalysts for change, sparking conversations and inspiring actions that transcended individual lives. By honoring the past, she had helped shape the future. And so as she sat in her living room one evening penning another entry in her journal, Eleanor smiled. Her journey had been long and challenging, filled with moments of doubt and triumph. But through it all, she had stayed true to herself and to her mission. Closing the journal, she whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for her ancestors, for her community, and for the countless strangers whose lives had been touched by their Median Stowe collection. Whatever lay ahead, she faced it with peace in her heart and pride in her soul. Years passed, and Eleanor Thompson grew older, her steps slower but her spirit as vibrant as ever. The traveling exhibit. Roots and Wings, the legacy of the Stowe collection, had become a national phenomenon, touching the lives of thousands across the country. Yet, despite its success, Eleanor never lost sight of what truly mattered, the intimate connection between the figurines and the stories they carried. For her, the replicas were a bridge, a way to extend their reach without diluting their essence. But the originals remained sacred, nestled in her apartment where they continued to inspire those fortunate enough to see them. As Eleanor entered her late 80s, she began to think more deeply about the future. Her health was still strong, but she knew that time was a gift not to be taken for granted. She wanted to ensure that the legacy of the Stowe collection would endure long after she was gone. This wasn't just about preserving the figurines. It was about safeguarding the values they represented: resilience, identity, and the power of storytelling. With this in mind, she decided to create something permanent, a place where the collection could live on, accessible to all while retaining the personal touch that made it so meaningful. Eleanor envisioned a small cultural center dedicated to Black history and heritage. It would serve as both a museum and a community hub, offering educational programs, workshops, and exhibitions inspired by the Stowe collection. Visitors would learn not only about the figurines themselves, but also about the broader context of African American art, culture, and resilience. Most importantly, the center would emphasize active participation, encouraging people to engage with history rather than simply observe it. To bring her vision to life, Eleanor reached out to Dr. Amelia Carter, who had been instrumental in creating the traveling exhibit. Together, they drafted a proposal outlining the center's goals and structure. They named it the Stowe Heritage Center, honoring the artisans whose hands had shaped the figurines centuries ago. With Amelia's expertise and Eleanor's resources, they secured funding from philanthropists, foundations, and local government grants. The project quickly gained momentum, capturing the imagination of communities eager to support such an initiative. Construction began on a plot of land Eleanor owned in her neighborhood, a quiet corner of the city rich with history. As the building took shape, Eleanor spent countless hours overseeing every detail, from the design of the galleries to the selection of materials. She insisted on incorporating elements that reflected the warmth and intimacy of her own home, a cozy reading nook, a wall adorned with photographs of visitors who had attended her gatherings, and a central display case reserved exclusively for the original figurines. When the Stowe Heritage Center finally opened its doors, the event drew crowds from all over the country. Politicians, activists, artists, and ordinary citizens gathered to celebrate the culmination of Eleanor's lifelong dream. The ceremony began with a speech from Eleanor herself, delivered from a wheelchair she now used due to age-related mobility issues. Though frail, her voice remained steady and clear as she addressed the audience. "This center is more than a building," she said, her eyes scanning the sea of faces before her. "It's a promise to honor our ancestors, to educate future generations, and to remind ourselves of who we are and where we come from. These figurines are not mine alone. They belong to everyone who has ever struggled, dreamed, or hoped for a better tomorrow. May they continue to inspire us to rise above adversity and build a world rooted in love, respect, and understanding." Her words brought tears to many eyes, including those of Marcus, who had traveled from Chicago to attend the opening. He stood near the front of the crowd, holding his young daughter's hand. When Eleanor finished speaking, he approached her, kneeling beside her wheelchair. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You've changed my life and countless others in ways I can't even put into words." Eleanor smiled, patting his hand gently. "It's not me you should thank," she replied. "It's your ancestors, and yours." She gestured toward Dai, the little girl peeking shyly from behind her father's leg. "She's the one who will carry the torch forward." Inside the center, visitors marveled at the exhibits, each designed to evoke thought and reflection. In one gallery, interactive displays allowed children to try their hand at carving wood, guided by instructors who explained traditional techniques. In another, a timeline traced the history of African American craftsmanship, highlighting the contributions of enslaved artisans and their descendants. A special section was devoted to Eleanor's journey, featuring photographs, letters, and audio recordings of her speaking about the collection. But the heart of the center was the room, housing the original figurines. Encased in glass yet illuminated warmly, they seemed almost alive, their intricate details catching the light and drawing viewers closer. Nearby, plaques provided context, sharing the stories behind each piece and connecting them to larger themes of resilience and hope. Visitors lingered here longer than anywhere else, some sitting quietly on benches, absorbing the weight of what they saw. Over the following months, the Stowe Heritage Center became a cornerstone of the community. School groups visited regularly, participating in workshops and discussions that encouraged critical thinking about history and identity. Families brought their elders to share memories and pass down oral traditions. Artists displayed their work in rotating exhibitions, using the space as a platform to explore contemporary issues through the lens of heritage. Even skeptics who had once questioned Eleanor's decision to keep the figurines private found themselves won over by the center's inclusive approach. For Eleanor, watching the center thrive brought immeasurable joy. Though she visited less, frequently now preferring to rest at home, she stayed involved through weekly updates from Amelia and other staff members. On sunny afternoons, she often sat by her window, gazing at the building visible from her apartment. Knowing that her legacy was secure filled her with peace. One evening, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she felt a familiar ache in her chest, a reminder of her advancing years. She moved slowly to her desk, retrieving her journal for one final entry. Her handwriting was shaky but legible as she wrote, "Today I am grateful. Grateful for the journey that led me here, for the people who walked beside me and for the ancestors whose strength carried me through. My work is done, but theirs continues. Let us never forget that our roots give us wings, and that the stories we tell today will shape the dreams of tomorrow." Closing the journal, Eleanor placed it carefully on the shelf beside the figurines. Then, leaning back in her chair, she closed her eyes, a contented smile spreading across her face. Outside, the city buzzed with life, unaware that one of its brightest lights had begun to dim. Yet within the walls of the Stowe Heritage Center, Eleanor's spirit burned brightly, illuminating paths for generations to come. And so, Eleanor Thompson passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the artifacts and memories that had defined her life. Her death marked the end of an era, but her legacy lived on, not just in the center she had created, but in the hearts of all who had been touched by her courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment to preserving the past. Through the Stowe collection, she had given the world a gift infinitely greater than carved wood, a reminder that history is alive, breathing, and waiting to be embraced.